So at this point, I'm going to bring Anthony Henry in, and also Winston Class to run the next part of our presentation, which is the panel discussion. And I'm going to bring all of the presenters in. So Dr. Neil Fleshner is on the phone. So, so everyone is back in. So
I'm here, Ken. All good.
Great. All right. So Anthony, if you want to proceed.
Okay. Thanks, Ken, and thanks, panelists, for rejoining this group. So the objective of two organizations, the African Cancer Support Group and the Walnut Foundation over the years have been primarily around self-help and how we can make a difference in the people that we are interacting with, as well as engaging communities and stakeholders like some of these folks assembled here today. So this next phase, we're going to look at, some of the issues around the best way forward, best practices, and things like that. But before I do that, I want to call in Winston Class to say a few words about his personal experiences. Winston is a board member at the Walnut Foundation, but he also has decades of experience participating in and running support groups. He actually chairs a support group geared to men with advanced prostate cancer. So Winston, could you just say a few words to open this segment? And then probably what we'll do is if folks have questions, they can put it in the chat. And then I'll also have some questions here for the panel to mull over. Winston, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Really, I'm almost a surrogate for the attendees out there, because I know with the webinars, you're not able to interact directly with a specialist. So I know you'll be watching at me, and I hope I represent you well. As I listened to the presentations, a number of things that they said triggered various incidents in my personal journey. I certainly can't state all of them. You know, there's limits to the time, but I'll do some top of mind impressions, which I'm sure are going through the minds of just about all the attendees there as they listen to presentations. And perhaps that can help you to, in terms of framing your questions. And what I kept asking myself, whether it was an emotional thing or an interaction with the health system, was it just me? And it just happened to me by fluke? Was it a Black thing? Does this happen to Black men? Does it happen to all men? Am I overreacting? And that is the question mark I had over each one of them. So I'll start first with the mental part of it, more of a cultural thing. Some things that came out of Dr. Kwatu's presentation. When I was diagnosed, I went through a depression, not a serious one, for about a week. I was just in a fog. And then the moment I was persuaded to just get out there, collect your data, and fight the damn thing, the fog just miraculously lifted. Now, is it me? Is it a Black thing? Does it happen to everybody? I throw that out, okay? Soon after I was diagnosed, I tried to start a Black support group, and I tried it in the most modest way possible. I got the wife of someone who was diagnosed to cook some good soup on a Sunday afternoon, and I had about 6 to 8 men, Black men around me. And I thought, well, okay, that's a good start. The odors from the kitchen, the aromas from the kitchen were smelling good and all of that. Football was on. Everybody kept talking about football. For an hour and a half, they knew very well why they came there. So I turned to the host and he turned to me. I think I got what he said. And I immediately went to my story. I just cut the football and I just talked about myself. And the moment I said it, the guy next to me, who happened to be a garage mechanic, he just started talking and he couldn't stop. Okay. Is this situation a general situation? Is it a Black situation? Is it a man thing? I'll leave that there with the mental. Genetics. The top of mind one for me is that my son. I am trying to get him to do regular screening. And he's kind of very casual about it. Now it upsets me because I know he should. Is it just happening to me? Again, the same questions. It's very important when you have younger members of the family and you know about the genetics or the connection with this prostate cancer, that you motivate them to go through prevention routines or whatever. And so it's something I threw out. I mean, I'm sure it's a struggle that people with a history of prostate cancer go through. Then I'm just going to mention 2 points on masculinity. One is, it was a very interesting one, and it reflects my background from the Caribbean. When I was diagnosed with prostate cancer and opted for surgery, the specialist turned to me and said, well, look, I'll tell you something, you know, your prostate gland is a little bit large for the surgery, and we're going to give you something to shrink it. But at the same time, it's going to reduce your sex drive. And I said to myself, oh no, I can't think of anything that could reduce my sex drive. Well, I took the pills and it was a moment, it was a eureka moment. It was a very sobering moment. It did reduce my sex drive completely. It's the macho kind of thing that goes with sexuality, and I had to revise my old thoughts about it after that. The second thing that happened is that, and again, back to the sexuality and the masculinity, is that I think it's so close, it is very hard to share it. It was very hard to share the emotions that I went through because it was so close to me, okay? And finally, on the exercise part of it, I come from an older generation of men, and I hear the benefits of structured exercise and doing it in company, but I just can't get myself to do it because it was not part of my culture. So I do my walks, I do my cycling by myself. I have stuff to do with rowing machines and stationary bikes in the winter. I know I should go out there and go structured thing, do a group thing, and it's more motivating, but I don't do it. So here's some top of mind impressions. I'm sure similar impressions are going through for the people in the audience that might lead to questions or different questions. And I thought I'll just kick this off. Back to you, Anthony.
Okay, thanks, Winston. Thanks for opening up yourself and letting us into your thoughts on this. Probably I want to turn it over to the panel, and maybe somebody wanted to comment on a specific piece of what Winston touched on. And also for those in the audience, feel free to put something in the chat.
But I guess I should say something. Thank you, Winston. Thank you, audience, for sticking with us for this long. It's been a couple of hours. I think, Winston, your situation is perfectly average in terms of representing the experience of Black men who discover they have prostate issues and how they deal with it. That's been the experience of my very best friend, the experience of my dad, who actually had prostate issues during COVID, just at the beginning of COVID. So he had to live with this, you know, the thing they stick in your penis. I forget what it's called again. Because the prostate was urinary tract. In any case, I think the complexity of masculinity, hypermasculinity, which is something that's prevalent amongst our young men because of the societal limitations on expression of manliness, by which I mean what it means to fulfill one's social responsibilities as a man, and the limitations that systemic racism places in the way of Black men from fulfilling those things. But just we deal with a lot of stigma, and public stigma around prostate cancer, mental health illness, all the diseases, coupled with self-stigmatization. So the public stigma is something many people report is as bad as the disease or the illness itself, because the stigma brings a sense of shame and a sense of questioning one's identity as a man, as you discussed. But then there's a self-stigmatization, which actually sustains the delay in help seeking. You only had a week, so if a week was the bar, we would be pretty good. But unfortunately, for many people, that period of time, a stage of denial sets in, and it could extend for months and even years, that people conceal their illness because it's concealable. And you touched on it, sexual functioning, which is actually part of the social definition of Black maleness. When you lose that, it's not just you have to deal with it within your own community. It actually has ramifications for what you have grown to understand as being, a definitive trait or a definitive attribute. So really, to some extent, you lose a check mark on the identity checklist.
Right.
And you wonder, well, what comes next when I can't fulfill this basic function? At the very least, this is what I was good for, but here I am, I can't even do this. Right. So I think really, one of the things I didn't touch on a lot was the ability to reduce stigma. That, there's a huge compilation of evidence in the mental health field that stigma expresses itself across all society, but most problematically, our health professionals have the same level of stigma as society. And in mental health, that means psychiatrists, nurses, social workers, and psychologists have similar levels of stigma as everybody. And we assume otherwise. You assume a psychiatrist would be less stigmatizing than an ordinary member of society, and that's not the case. But what we did learn is, with stigma reduction interventions, including education, interaction with people who are mentally ill, when they're well as when they're ill, and accountability around expressions of stigma, you can reduce stigma in healthcare settings, and you can make the place safe for people who are mentally ill, and they feel more welcome, they're more likely to express themselves. I don't know what the situation is like with prostate, but since I was personally involved with some mental health research, and it was demonstrated, I believe that there's a huge potential with prostate stigma research within our community as well as within healthcare settings.
I was wondering if John perhaps might have a comment on the mental health piece, stemming from what Winston had to say.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, so just the context. I sort of chime in on the self stigma, and it's one of those ones that's super interesting. So we're often really hard on ourselves, and when we're hard on ourselves, it's hard to find remedy because it's all about deficit. And I think the self stigma is just one of those ones that will often look internally, especially around, if we've got some sexual dysfunction, for want of a better term. So again, just trying to think about it differently and trying to create the space for conversation. But definitely when it's held inside and not discussed and not kind of worked out, it's very, very challenging, right? So that's we in guys who experience mental health challenges too, oftentimes we'll find higher levels of self-stigma in those guys than guys who are not afflicted with some of those challenges. Super interesting.
Thank you. And it's so important to be aware of the resources that are available. And some of them were shared earlier today in terms of supports from mental health and also supports in terms of exercise, for example. Moving along, One of the issues that I want to talk about is who needs to be educated and how. We often come across in our travels at the Walnut Foundation, Black men in their 50s during our outreach efforts who have never had a PSA or digital exam, some of whom are a family doctor. Can the panel speak to how we might best deal with this issue more effectively going forward?
Ken, maybe I can, and group, maybe I could take a stab at that one.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's a bit of, as I'm sure many of you know, there remains controversy about PSA screening for prostate cancer. And I think sometimes that gives family doctors an easy out not to discuss the pros and cons with the patient. And I don't think we should be letting family doctors get off the hook like that. So I think, and this is why we want to educate the medical community, because certainly those at higher risk, logically speaking, would deserve a better conversation about risk, about screening, as well as the pros and cons. Secondly, so we want to raise the level of education around primary care. And I also think, you know, that in today's world with social media, you know, we can even overcome some of those problems by generating a movement. I mean, it sounds daunting to generate a movement, but there's so much goodwill right now and so much ease of touching millions of people not expensively with social media that I don't think we should be intimidated in a negative way from trying to do something like that. We cannot, it breaks my heart when I see men come in with metastatic disease and they're old, you know, some of them are older, some of them aren't. And so I think we really have an opportunity here.
Okay, thank you. The next question has to do with second opinions. We have been told by some men that they never considered getting a second opinion on their diagnosis or proposed treatment plan. Others have experienced severely strong pushback when they ask to be referred for a second opinion. Can the panel comment on this and how the patient might deal with this issue? Again, we are trying to focus on, you know, help. How do we help? How can we help?
Well, I think, again, I'll take a stab at first and then we'll hear from others. I apologize because I'm on phone. I can't raise my hand. Look, I think a lot of patients I see are second and third opinions, but I do see patients as first opinions. I would say at least 80% of the patients I see, I offer them a second opinion myself, mostly because radiation is, you know, in many cases is a reasonable alternative to surgery, and thus the patient should be informed about both. And I feel the radiation side of things is best done by them as opposed to myself as a surgeon. There is about 20% of men, 30% who say I'm not interested, and that's fine. So again, this gets to educating clinicians, but also, you know, I never understands me what kind of pushback one gets from a doctor who's offended by a second opinion. And you know, this is not the National Health Service. You have the right to go see somebody else free of charge in the Canadian healthcare system. So we need to empower the patients as well.
Any other comments on this from anybody else?
Just from a mental health point of view, I think I've seen the groups do really nice work in terms of helping guys slow it down to make an informed decision. And oftentimes you're feeling very rushed, got to make a decision, got to jump in there. And I think, you know, the groups do a nice job of just trying to help slow it down to a point where, you know, that due diligence to check out the options and make an informed decision, because it's healthier in terms of reducing that regret, that potential regret, that decisional regret that can come with having, you know, taken a particular pathway or not having done all of the work of it. So I think, again, the group does a nice job generally of being able to just put it in perspective, because it's probably been there a while, the cancer, and you know, it's something that can take a little bit of time to get a second opinion.
Are there any questions in the chat at this point?
Yeah.
Or should I continue?
So there's some questions in here. This one is for Dr. Kenty, but I think it should be anyone can answer. Any idea why there is such a high incidence of prostate cancer in the Caribbean? But anyone can answer that.
I would suspect it has to do with genetic risk combined with probably a high incidence of metabolic syndrome, which was touched on by our first speaker, you know, hypertension, diabetes, dietary factors. And then to add the third sort of, fuel to the fire, maybe cultural issues as we've discussed around getting tested early, masculinity. So to me, it's probably a perfect storm for that unfortunate statistic.
Yeah. Dr. Kenty, any comments? You're on mute. Sorry.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, so I want to answer that question, but I also want to very quickly sort of reinforce the point about primary care and about so personal empowerment and primary care, holding primary care accountable. I actually asked my primary care doctor is retired, so I have a sort of a stand-in until I get a new primary care doctor. And about less than a month ago, I'm doing my regular checkup, and I said I would like to do a PSA test, get a test. And she told me no. She told me I should think about it, and she gave me some forms and said, really, that she doesn't think it's worth it. I'm not showing any risk. I'm not presenting with any symptoms that suggest I need it. And she actually, I didn't argue. I didn't argue because she's not my permanent doctor. So I said, okay, I just do, it's a teachable moment, but for me anyway. So actually, this is the second opinion. Why would I I know that I want to do this. So, I go ahead and I get somebody else who will help me do it, because that's not a satisfactory response. And she didn't factor my cultural identity into her feedback to me. So that was number one. Anyway, the Caribbean is an incubator for communicable diseases, precisely because it's rooted. The society has never moved away from its slavery past, and it has never dealt with the consequences from diet, behaviors, the structure, the inbuilt structure that people assume that because the majority of the population is Black, that the culture is reinforcing and positively Black, which it isn't. We have still many legacies left over, particularly in diet and nutrition, that should be questioned and should be challenged and should be changed. And we have the University of the West Indies, but there's much more that needs to be done in this regard. But I think it's due to the slavery legacies that persist and remain. Slavery and colonization. And remember, we only ended the colonial period in 1960, which is 60 years. So, we still have legacies to deal with.
There is another question here. Our masculinity is largely influenced by our father, background, and community. When we're infused into another culture, what is the best method to influence change of the learned behavior? You want it, John?
What an amazing question. So it is interesting. So that oftentimes, and I can just say that some of the guys that we've spoken to that might come from a distinct ancestry and aligned to many of the masculine norms within that culture are conflicted a little bit. And I think that vignette that I offered of George, sort of goes some way towards, saying some of those tensions. Masculinities are really interesting because they're performativities generally. In whatever context you're in, you might show up a little bit differently to satiate the crowd to fit in, so to speak. And I think that's what happens a lot of times when we're from other cultures and we're in a dominant culture and we want to fit, but we also don't want to relinquish, some aspects of our past or our ancestry that we value. I don't know if I'm fully answering this question, but just to say, I think about it a lot in terms of plurality, and we talk to guys about their masculine values as well as their virtues. So we try to be strength-based, because the last thing I want to do is say, that somehow masculinity is bad for you. It is not. It can be strength-based and asset building. And the deficit piece around toxic masculinity is deeply unhelpful for many men who reside in respectful places and do their best to show up and be the best they can be. So I try to think about, that reconciliation about how to fit, but also honouring your past, your ancestry, the things that matter to you, and recognising there's always going to be shifts within it. So I probably pleaded the fifth there and didn't really answer the question, but I hope it offers some kind of sense of, that it is a plurality. It's not a single thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a response.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
There is
I could only quote from my personal experience. Within the culture, particularly with prostate cancer and its association with sexuality, there's so much disinformation and misinformation and rumors and myths that you find that when you're diagnosed, you almost react to the disease, not to your benefit. And my exposure to the mainstream support groups helped me quite a bit, because they taught me that you rise above it, look at it as an issue, as a problem, and just attack the problem, and then you're more proactive. So in that way, it created a cultural sort of change in the way I am. I looked at the disease, and it was good for me.
So that goes along with Winston with a comment from someone joined from the UK, and a very long comment, but the person said, I think it's also the stigmatic, my tongue is getting in front of me. The stigmas of having cancer among the community and the taboos associated with cancer.
Yes.
So there's a lot of stigmatization within the, Black communities about cancer. I think we're finding that all over.
Yeah. Can I just add a point to that?
Yeah.
Because stigma doesn't express itself until you have the disease. You're not dealing with stigma, understanding stigma, or repudiating stigma. You only find out about the stigma when you actually have the condition and you're dealing with it. So in terms of educating yourself or educating your family prior to that, that doesn't really happen, because you don't even know you have the stigma. Right. It's only when the condition expresses itself and all of a sudden, your wife might want to go to bed with you, or your husband might. The other thing is around gay men who have prostate cancer, Black gay men who have prostate cancer, whose sexuality is an issue and whose masculinity is an even deeper issue. There's all of these things are compounded, and but the point to note is that the stigma doesn't express itself until you have the condition. So you can't really prepare yourself to be able to deal with it. You don't even know you have the stigma. You don't even know your family have the stigma, your friends have the stigma. And thus the challenge is really a complex one.
Mm-hmm. So we next want to move on to new therapies. And the question is, and how the audience can access these. So can the panel comment on access to new therapies and how one might access things like new drugs and new procedures, like transperineal biopsies, for example, which are not available in some centers, like say Peel region, for example, where I am right now, transperineal biopsy is not offered. Any of the clinicians can answer that piece?
Yeah, I mean, I could take a stab. Transperineal biopsy of itself is still a bit of a controversial topic in terms of whether it truly represents a step forward or not. especially in the context of the Canadian healthcare system. But access to new treatments and procedures in general, the way it sort of unfolds, particularly in Canada, is interesting because usually the Americans get it first. And that's particularly true around medication. You know, Canada has got a very strange system because Health Canada approves, then provinces are responsible to pay. So it takes them a good 12 to 24 months to decide whether they want to pay or not. And in that period, you often have, in particular, a spotty access to those new treatments because sometimes the pharmaceutical companies will create programs of free access to the drugs, but they're only available in certain centers of excellence, et cetera. So there's always going to be a disparate sort of patchwork of accessibility in the Canadian system. And by the way, each province has its own set of rules and processes. So sometimes you can have a drug available in Ontario, not available in British Columbia, for example, or Alberta. Radium was never available, a drug called Zofio in Alberta, yet it was in Ontario. Robotic surgery was never reimbursed in Ontario, literally till about 3 weeks ago, whereas it's been fully reimbursed in Alberta for the last 8 years. So, you know, I think the best way for patients, again, to do this is to navigate their healthcare systems. You know, I work in a major center. It's easy for me to say, but, you know, shop around a little bit, read, and see what's available. And again, PSMA imaging is another example Dr. Fraser talked about.
Okay, thank you.
There are 2 questions in the chat I want to get over with. How often should one have regular screening done if not in a family history, if there's no evidence in family history? Dr. Fleshner?
Yeah, again, it depends on risk. What I tend to tell patients is an average risk patient would be age 50. You know, annual PSA is very pragmatic. I mean, there's some evidence if your PSA is less than 1 at age 50, you probably don't even need another test for 5 years. The problem with that, which I think is great, the problem with it is people tend to forget to do the test, and then they wake up and they're 63 and they said, oh my God, I haven't had a test, and they get diagnosed late. So I think pragmatically speaking, age, you know, once a year, age 50 for an average risk male, high risk male, more often, probably every, you know, starting at age 40. For the genetic risk males we talked about, we're now doing annual MRIs, for example, as a hyper surveillance or hyper detection strategy. The only other piece I would add is I still see PSAs being done routinely in 75 and 80-year-olds. It probably should be stopped at a certain age, 72, 3, 4. Why? Because the cancer is largely detected that way, killed 15, 20, 30 years later. There's no point in creating cancer statistics and all the downsides that does in elderly people who are unlikely to who are likely to have the cancer, but unlikely to die from it.
Okay. There is another one. Is there a special procedure or therapy for cancer at the rear of the prostate? Dr. Fleshner?
At the what of the prostate?
At the rear of the prostate.
Rear of the prostate.
Rear.
The whole prostate's in the rear.
Probably closer to
R-E-A-R?
the blood.
Sorry.
Yeah, REAR. Probably closer to the
well, the whole prostate is you know, just in front of the rectum, right? It's in the lower pelvic area. They all are. I'm not sure what the specific question. There are sometimes cancers. There are unique cancers sometimes in the opposite of the rear, in the what we call the anterior, or if you imagine a man lying flat on a table, the tumor would be, most tumors are in the prostate closer to the floor. About 10% originate in the zone of the prostate close to the ceiling. If that's what the question refers to, most cancers arise in the posterior or the floor side of the prostate if a man's lying flat. And there is a few additional treatments. So the main one being high intensity focused ultrasound, HIFU, but it's not reimbursed in Canada, and still learning a lot about it.
Okay. All right, that's it, Anthony.
Okay. So we're bringing this to a close then?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks everyone for participating in this segment of the conference. We hope you learned a lot today. And, a big part of what we're trying to do is to make a difference, improve outcomes. And so I hope we met that hurdle in terms of what we presented here today. Again, the hope is we have better outcomes, improved outcomes for all the folks in our environment. Thank you.
And so, Anthony, before we wrap it up, I just want to just share for everyone our support group. So we have a support group, a virtual prostate cancer support group, a safe space of Black men that we talked about. The next meeting is on October 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. This flyer is going to be on our website. So www.thewalnutfoundation.com. If you're recently diagnosed, you're in treatment right now, or you're post-treatment, and would like to be in a safe space with other Black men discussing, it's really a fantastic place to be. All of the men who show up leave with something. So I'd encourage you to join the group and share your experience or learn from the people within this. Okay, so we're now 15 minutes past our 2 o'clock deadline, but it's been a great conference. It's been very informative, and I know that everyone left with something. I really want to thank the presenters. Everyone had something specific and different to say, starting with Dr. Kenty this morning, right on up until Dr. Fraser. It was all great. It's going to be recorded. It's being recorded, and once I get permission from the speakers, we're just going to place it on our website so people can go back and review it again. So thank you very, very much to everyone. It's been a fantastic conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas.
Thank you for involving me.
Thank you.